Okay, so in this video, I am going to demonstrate how to publish a website where people are able to access this website, from anywhere in the world. And the process is there are a lot of steps, but I'm going to walk you through a lot of these steps. Um, I can't go through every single one for the sake of time, but I'll go ahead and give you a background on things that need to be done. If I'm not able to show you in detail what's going on, but I'm going to create a website that has two pages, and these are going to be somewhat familiar to you. These are pages that we have created in the past, and we're able to view this using Live Server. Here is an example on the right of one of the pages that I'll be using, and this will be used as the home page, but I'm going to add a couple of things to this. And then the other page is a contact page. So if I were to show preview here, here's an example of the contact page. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to this website, I'm going to create a navigation menu for both of these pages, for the contact page as well as for the home page. And then from there, I'm going to go through the steps of publishing all of this stuff on to a server. Now, just a quick overview. I went ahead and created a domain. And to create a domain, you'd have to go and subscribe to one. And there are different domain services out there. GoDaddy.com is a very popular one. So if you want to come up with your own URL, then you can go to GoDaddy.com, type in a possible domain name and see if it's available, and they'll let you know how much that costs. So this is something that I've already done prior to this video, and I'll show you my domain name in a minute. But that would be one of the first steps if you're going to want to publish this website for everyone to see. And then another component to this is subscribing to a host. Now you could possibly host your own website for everyone to see, but a lot of people tend to outsource this just because of all the services that are made widely available, and it not really that expensive, relatively speaking. And you can do this host from GoDaddy, or there are other services out there, other vendors out there. And one of the vendors that I am using is called HostGator. Now, HostGator is where my website will reside on their servers, and it will give me access to a database server and so on that I'll demonstrate. HostGator is another domain service provider, so you can also purchase your URL there. So we'll get back to this in a moment, but first let's go ahead and take a look at the homepage right here. So I'm going to go back to show preview, and I'm going to be adding a navigation menu up top, and I will do this by first going into the body of the HTML. I'm going to create a UL tag, and inside here, I'm going to be including a couple of lists. So I'll do a list times 2. And in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an anchor tag. And here, this is going to be considered my home page. So I'll just leave it as home. And then I'll do the same thing in the second list. And this will be my contact page. And you can see what happens right here when I'm starting to populate these elements. Now, when it comes down to the reference, I'm going to go ahead and reference the HTML pages of interest. Since this HTML is called index.html, what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to go ahead and write, I'll write index.html. So that's going to be the home. And then for the contact, it'll be contact.html. Now, just to avoid errors when I put this on the servers, it's good practice to just put a period, which just means a current directory of where your files are. So I'm just going to keep it like that. If you want to go to a previous directory, so if your HTML file happens to be in a different folder and this is the current one, then you would put 2 dots. But I'm going to leave this as current directory. Now let's see here. So I got these 2 links, and I'm going to just do some CSS so I can put these horizontally as a navigation menu up top. Now I'm going to go ahead first. I'm going to go ahead and create a class, and I'll call this navigation. And then I will refer to that here in my CSS. All right, navigation. And here, what I'll do is I'm going to indicate that I want to make this a flex box, right? So this is something that we've interacted with before. So for the display, I'm going to say flex. You can see it starts to change. And I will also want to work on the justifying the content, and I'll say space evenly. So it's just going to kind of shift that way. And I want to remove these dots right here from the list items. So I can go ahead and say list style, none, that'll disappear. Now, I also want to remove the underlining, but I'm going to go ahead and before I do that, I'm going to give a background color to the navigation menu, and I'm going to give it a black color. And then my text, I want it to be white. Now, let's see what happens. It's currently blue because of the anchor tag. That's the default, but I'm going to go ahead and now work on that anchor tag. And what I can do here is I'll copy this class selector, and then I will put an A. So this is going to be a descendant selector. And then I will work on text decoration and say none. All right. So that takes care of that. Okay, now it's possible that I would need to change the color inside this selector. So let's see what, yep, there we go. So now that turns into white. So I'm good to go. Now this is going to be my navigation menu. If I were to click here, it should navigate to the contact.html. See, I have a contact.html right here. So if I click on that, it'll direct me there. Now, when I click on it, it takes me to the contact.html page, but I also want a navigation menu there. And to do that, I'm going to have to copy some code to that HTML page. And the code that I'm going to copy is all the HTML elements related to the navigation. So I'm going to copy that, go to the contact.html, go to its body, and I'm going to paste that over right there. And I got the list with these two values. Now it's not styled. I'd have to style this page too, but I don't want to have to copy the styles again. Now what I'll do in this case is I'm going to go ahead and create an external CSS. So I'm going to write main.css right here. And the CSS that I worked on for the navigation menu earlier, right here, I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to exit. Actually, I'm not going to copy, I'm going to cut it and I'm going to paste it inside here. And then I'll just hit save. I'll go back to the index.html, but notice because I cut it out, these are not styled anymore. So up here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to indicate the link to point to the CSS declarations in the main.css. So right here, I'm going to write main.css, right? And I'll go back to looking at, oh, I was looking at the contact form, but that would have been the same thing if, let me go ahead and just remove that and go show preview here. And yeah, see that it's not styled. But now when I go and I enter that link tag referencing main.css, it goes and styles it. I'm going to do the same thing now for the other HTML page. Now I'll show a preview. There are the two elements, but it's not styled. But what I'll do is I'll include that link right here. And now that's styled, right? So instead of me having to put CSS embeddedly in this HTML page, now it's just pointing there and it's less code, right? And it should be functional. If I click to the home button, it navigates to the home, contact navigates to the contact, and I'm good to go here. Since I do have the main.css that contains my styles, I can go ahead, if there's any other CSS in my HTML, I can dump it into this file. Now, for example, I believe the index.html already has these styles embedded in relation to this web page. I can leave it there, or I can just cut it out and I'm going to paste it inside here. And now my index.html has no CSS. It's just linked to it externally, right? Now, what I'm also going to do here is I want to include a fave icon, the fave icon. So if I were to view the live server approach, then I want to be able to see an icon on the tab, right? So for example, if I right click open live server, it'll open up a browser and it will display the tab, but there's no icon. So I'm going to give it the favicon. And to do that, I'm I'm going to go ahead and create another link. And right here, instead of style sheet, which is a default, I'm going to just write icon. And then I'm going to address the location. So right here is, I have the gmu.png. This is something that we used before in the past. So if I write that, it's going to go ahead and display that favicon. Right. So I went ahead and saved it and it executed. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for my contact.html. I'm just going to copy that and I'm good to go. But I want to structure my my files a little bit differently now. Since I have multiple files that are related to pictures, let me go ahead and create a folder, and I'm going to call this folder images. And I'm going to drag that patriot.jpg, which is a Patriot logo. I'm going to just go ahead and move it to that folder. And I'm going to do the same thing for the gmu.png, which is for the favicon. I'll drag it over to that folder. Yes, I do want to move it. And because I've changed my file structure here, I'm going to have to also make that change in my code. So currently I have gmu.png, but that's no longer the address. It's now going to be images gmu.png. All right, so that's something that I need to make a change. I also would need to make a change here because it's no longer patriot.jpg. It's supposed to say images/patriot.jpg, and now we see it populate right there because of how I've structured it. Now, I'll go ahead and just write Patriot logo right there, and I'm good to go. All right, I'm going to go to the contact page and make the same change. So I'm going to write images, and it's going to be that file right there. So I'm good. Okay, and so the same thing in terms of what I was saying earlier, like this backslash. I can put a dot backslash. This is going to avoid any sort of errors when I start publishing this onto the host. So I'll hit save right there, and then let me do the same thing right here. So, and have that right there is good, and it should work just fine. Okay, now I have this set up. It's working just fine, right? Go to home, go to contact. Both have these navigation menus. So now the next step is to work on transferring these files over to the host. But actually, before I do that, I just want to quickly go and do an overview of the contact page. So here's the contact page, and I'll do a show preview. And here is how it looks like. This should not be strange to you. You can see that the way I've set it up, I have the navigation menu right here. Then I have a form that contains labels and inputs, right? And I went ahead and put line breaks in between these inputs. So when we're looking at the name related content, there's some space between that and the email related content. These are these two line breaks right there. Now, I have to be very careful on the way that I enter attributes for my inputs and my label. For example, here is my first text input, and I want to make sure that I use this attribute name. And I went ahead and gave it the value name. And the reason why I have this set up in this manner is because since my form, this contact form, is going to be recording data onto a database, then I need to make sure that I have this name attribute set up. You can see right here, if I go to the other input related to email, I have a name attribute and I give it the value email, right? And then when I go here to my radio buttons, I do have radio buttons and I gave it a name, and the name is message type. Same with the other radio button, right? And because my two radio buttons have the same name, I am able to make sure that the user only is able to select one of these radio buttons. So that's one purpose the name is used for, but the other purpose is that the name attribute is going to be used, or particularly the value that's inside the name attribute is going to be used to record that data once the user fills this out and hits submit. All right, now, and then lastly, here's the text area where they can enter the message. There's a name, and I set it to message. All right. Now, I am going to need to specify an action here. And this is something that we haven't really been working on when we have been introduced to forms. So I need to put in a value here, and I'm going to be putting in a value here. Now, the value that I put here, it has to point to a programming script, and that script is responsible for recording the data and sending the data into a database. This is going to be done using a different programming language called PHP. And it's a very popular programming language when it comes down to forms and databases when you're working on websites. And I do have a PHP script, and I'm going to show you how that looks like. Let me go ahead and bring that in. I'm going to go ahead and create a file. I'm going to call this demo.php. So this is an extension that's different from what we've been interacting with. And this demo.php is going to contain some PHP code. And let me show you what that code is going to be. Now, this code is something that I had to, I looked at the documentation and I had to customize it to what I am trying to record. So I have some code in a notes file that I'm just going to copy and paste it over right here. And I will close this out and show you what that would look like, right? Now, here is an example. Let me see if I can do a split really quick. So I'll say split to the right. And so we can kind of compare certain things here from the contact.html and the demo.php. So the demo.php, we have an opening code right here that just lets the system know that we're going to be taking a look at PHP code. And just to kind of give you a quick walkthrough, this is obviously code that is not something you need to memorize, but you just kind of want to just know how this is tied in to our contact form that's going to be recording that data when the user interacts with that. We have these 4 variables being created. In PHP, when you create a variable, you start off with the $sign. So we have a variable called name, a variable called email, a variable called message type, another variable called message, right? And there's some other code right here. And we have a get. Now, that is related to the method that's found in the form. So if you recall, the form is going to contain, right, an action, and that's going to be the script, the PHP script, which I call demo.php, right? So I'm going to be pointing to this script right here, this code. Now, the method, there are 2 types, and it could either be a get or it could be a post. So I'm going to go ahead and just type in get right here because that's how it's being coded into PHP, and we'll look at the differences in a moment. But the get is a less secure way of collecting data and sending it to the server compared to post. Now, there's some additional code that's set up. This is all related to the database setup that I'm going to show you in a moment. Where you have to indicate the host, the username, person responsible for the database. They'll have a password, so I'm going to set up a password. This will be the password. And then a database name that I have to create in the HostGator services. And then there's a connection, SQL. They're going to be using MySQL, which is the database service that HostGator is allowing me to use when I subscribe to their services. So this code is just related to creating a database connection from the website to the actual database. And then we have some SQL statements, and I know a lot of you haven't taken MIS 310 just yet, but this is a statement where we record the different inputs that the user is entering in the form, so name, email, message type, and so on, right? And from there, it's going to just go ahead and process. Now, if there's an error with the connection between the website and the database, it's going to just let the user know. But eventually, whatever values that the user puts in the form, it's going to be bind together with the variables. And then eventually, it's going to let the user know that it has been executed and their information on the form has been saved, right? So PHP is a language that can handle that. JavaScript could do this too, but PHP is a very popular one that is used to be able to connect to a database. So now I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this script, and I'm not going to, well, actually, yes, I'll hit save. And I have my file, my PHP file being set correctly, and then I am using the get method. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save now. And then now these files can be transferred over to the host. All right, so let's go ahead and see how that works. All right, I'm going to just exit out of this contact form. I'm going to go ahead and I am going to go into HostGator, and this will be my web host. There's my username, there's my password, all right, some security stuff, which I always tend to get wrong, but let's go ahead and see if this is going to work out. I think that is it. No, traffic lights. All right, here we go. Motorcycle. Annoying. All right. Okay, now, as I mentioned earlier, I purchased my URL, my domain from GoDaddy, and my domain is this right here, data-gates.com. I could have gotten it from HostGator, but you can just compare prices, and I believe GoDaddy was less expensive. And a lot of these URLs could be very inexpensive, could range from like $4 to, even thousands of dollars. And it's pretty much good for like the year. All right, now since I use two different services, one for my domain and one for my host, I had to tie in my domain name from GoDaddy to my host. That's something I'm not going to walk you through, but there's documentation on how to do something like that. But in any case, my domain is now it's pointing to datagates.com, and so HostGator knows that, and there's not going to be any issues when it comes down to that connection. Now, what I'm going to do once I go into my host, there is a control panel that I need to launch. So here, right here, it says Launch cPanel. I'm going to just click on that, and there's a whole bunch of services out there. It could be very overwhelming, but there's a lot of documentation and videos about how to go about all of this. But what I'm going to be doing right now is I'm going to first work on getting my files that I have on my computer. And when I'm saying my files, I'm talking about my Visual Studio files. So everything from the images to my HTML pages to my CSS, all of that I need to be dumped inside here, this host. And to do that, I'm going to go to File Manager. And when I go to File Manager, the default folder that it points to is public_HTML. I already have a couple of files there, but I'm just going to go ahead and I am going to search for the files on my computer by going to Upload, and I will work on locating those files. So the workspace is called Demo Sample, and these are all the files that I want to include. Now, let's see here. It gives me the option of dragging things. So let me see if I can drag things here. All right, it's not going to let me do that. Or maybe it is. Let's see. This is what I'll do. Go right here. And I'm going to drag my individual files. All right, so it did that. I don't think it allowed me to drag an entire file. No, it doesn't. So what I need to do is I need to open up this file and then just take the individual files and then dump it in here. And I'll just create the file again later on. It's me. We got, yes, we got all the files. We're good to go. All right. Now I have the files, and I'm going to go back to here. I'll hit refresh, and here are all my files. And I think yeah, those are all of them. I'm going to go ahead and just create a folder, and I'm going to call that folder images. And I'm going to be putting the files inside. Now, I believe there is this file that needs to be put inside images, and this file needs to be put inside images. And that's how I have it set up in my workspace. All right. Okay, so I'm good to go. And now I have my main.css, I have my index.html. We can disregard this one that was there prior to this video. There's my PHP file, and there's my contact form. Okay, good. Now, oftentimes hosting services will automatically look for an index.html and it will pick it up as the home page. Now, since I do have my file labeled as index.html, which is that Welcome Back Patriot page, I'm going to go ahead and test out and see if it's available in production once I dumped that stuff in. Now, here is live server. We know that this is live server based off of these numbers, so this is a local display. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type in www.datagates.com, and see if it picks up. And sure enough, it is displaying the home page, right? So the home page is at the index.html. If I go to contact, it's going to go ahead and navigate to the contact. Notice that the navigation menu is there. And then I also have the inputs. But now if I hit submit, right? So if I try to put in something, test at t.com, just put anything right there, hit submit, nothing's going to work. And that's because there's some things I would need to set up in the HostGator that's in order for the database to record that data. But I do have the files, right? So I have all my files in here. I have my PHP file, but now what I'm going to do, I'm going to get out of the file manager. Oh yeah, and there's the favicon being displayed as well, so that works just fine. Now I went to file manager and I dumped all the files inside in the public. I'll do this again in the public HTML, right? So that's the main area where you would want to put all your files in. And now after the file manager, I need to set up my database. So here's another component that I need to click on. So my SQL database, and I'm going to create a database here. And it's going to go ahead and anything that I create, it's going to, if I give it a database, for example, called demo, it's going to go ahead and create that database called demo, but preceding that, it's going to be my name, my name TE1_demo, right? That's just their default ways of doing things here at the HostGator service. So that's fine. I just have to keep in mind that my PHP file needs to have this type of a database name. And if I show you in Visual Studio Code, and I've already kind of set this up for us to kind of speed things up, when it comes down to DB name, right? So here is that first component that's just there by default. And then I'm going to give it the name demo. So that this is going to be my entire, I'm going to create it as demo right here. So I'll just hit create database and I'm going to go back. And the next part is I have to create, I have to allow a user to utilize that database. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and create a username, and that's going to also be called demo. And I have to give it a password. So this password is going to be relevant to this user, and I've already created this before, so I'm going to give it this password, right? And I'm going to just record that. I'll create the user. So I've created a user, I've created a database. And the last thing I need to do now is I need to give the user, so add user to database. So here's the user that I created. Here's the database that I created. They both have the same name. And I'm going to go ahead and here, I'm just going to say add. And I'm going to allow this username demo to have access to the database and give them all privileges, or her all privileges. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on that, make changes. And now I have this set up. I have the database set up, but I have to also I have to specify which type of information is going to be recorded, right? Now I'm going to get out of that, and I want to go back into the cPanel. So when I first went to the cPanel, the control panel, I went into File Manager. I dumped all my files there from Visual Studio Code. Then I went to my SQL database, and I created a database and then a user for that database. And I tied them together and gave that user all privileges. The next part is to now set up the type of inputs that we're going to be recording, and that's going to be through PHP My Admin. So I'm going to click on that. And what I'll do here is I need to now work on the database inputs that we're going to be recording. So I'm going to go ahead right now. There aren't any sort of input values like the name, the email, and so on. I'm going to go ahead and click on database. And right here, let's see, I want to select, I believe I'm just going to click on this right here, and then I'm going to give a database name. So the database name that I'll do is I'll call it demo table. And then I will hit create table. All right, and how many values is it going to have? So let's examine this. We have 1, 2, and then it's going to be either that's going to be 3, and then this is going to be 4. So there's going to be 4 columns. And then I want to add like something called the primary key just to identify the user automatically. So that would be 5. All right, so here I'm going to go ahead and write 5 columns. I'll hit go. and I'm going to just give the name. The first one is going to be an ID, and then it'll be the name followed by the email, and then it's going to be message type. That's that radio button. And then the last one is going to be the actual message, right? So name, email, message type, message. These are all the inputs that we are receiving from the form, right? And to give you an idea of this PHP file, right? Name, email, message type, message. I'm keeping that all consistent right here. Now I created a database and I created a table that has columns, which is basically like a spreadsheet. I labeled that spreadsheet demo table, and I'm going to be recording all of these values right now, right? So that is why I have it set up there. Now, the ID is going to be considered a unique identifier. And what I'm going to do here for attributes, not attributes, I'm sorry. It's going to be right here. For index, I'm going to give that a primary key. I'm just going to press go, and I'm just going to, this right here says auto increment. So anytime somebody goes to the form and enters information, it's going to start off with a value of 1. And then if there's another person that goes to the form and enters information, hit submit, and it's going to give a value of 2. So it's going to auto increment the ID. The name, I'm going to just put the type of input. So varchar is going to be like string related values. I'm just going to keep them all as that. And I'll give some values to them. Now here, I'm going to give the value of, let's say 20, 20, 20, 100. I'll just write 100. And I'm just going to give them the length of these inputs. I don't want to spend too much time being literal on what needs to be done here, but I got what needs to be there in order for me to hit save. And it'll go ahead and set this up. And here's my demo table where I have an ID. I'm going to record name, email, message type, message. All right. So that's set up. All right. Good. Now, what I need to do, I'll go to browse really quick and right here, check something. Okay. So currently there's nothing being recorded here, but I've set up the database. I set up the type of data that's going to be recorded. You can see that right there. And now that should be good enough for us to test out the form. Now here, I'm going to go back to the URL. So it's datagates.com. I'm just going to hit refresh, right? And then I'm going to go to contact. And then from here, I'm going to type in a value. So I'll say John Doe. And I'll say John at doe.com. And I'm going to select question and say, does this work? Right. So this is what is going to be entered into the form. We're going to hit submit and see if this works. If it doesn't, we troubleshoot, right? So I'll hit submit. I submit again. So, okay, something's not working. So I'm going to have to now troubleshoot. All right. So I believe I was able to pinpoint the issue. It's not something that was that easy to discover, but I went ahead and I was reviewing the code, the HTML code for the contact form. So I'm able to look at the code within the file manager. I don't have to open up Visual Studio. So if I were to go to edit for this file right here, there was a button tag here at the bottom and it has a label submit, but there was an attribute right here that was set up as type and then button, which is supposed to be acceptable, but for some reason that I'm not able to understand yet after reviewing the documentation, why it did not want to work with me. But I removed that type equals button and I just went ahead and saved it. And I went back to the website, go to contact, and then here I can type in test.com, and then I'll go ahead and say no. Yeah, all right. So I'll go ahead and use that as an email and this as the name. The reason I want to make sure I have an @ sign right here because for the input type, I specified type equals email. And that means if the user tries to just type something in and it doesn't have the @ sign, we're going to get a message saying that there needs to be a proper email. For example, if I just say, does this work, and hit submit, I get this indicator. But if I just make sure that I include that, and then I'm selecting a question, and that's something I want to circle back to. And I'm going to write, does this work? I hit submit, and then it goes off to a different page. It says record saved. Now, one thing I want you to pay attention to on this page, it says record saved. If you look at the URL, it has the data that the user entered. So name equals John plus Joe. And then for the email, this is what I wrote for the email, for the message type, right? And so on. So this information is not encrypted or wrapped in differently. So this is something that is you got to be careful depending on the type of information that's going to be entered in a form. And the reason behind that is because when we review the contact.html file, we went ahead and indicated that we're using a get method. So this get method will show that information that was entered to the user as it's getting transferred into the database. And we haven't looked to see if it has been in fact recorded to the database, but that's something that we'll go ahead and review now. So I'm going to go back to the control panel, and I'll go to phpMyAdmin. And from there, I'm going to locate the database, right? So here is the database, right? I called it demo table. If I were to click on that, and from there, I believe if we look right here, it says ID equals 2. The name is John Doe. There's an email, there's a question, and does this work? So ID equals 1 was when I first tested it when I was debugging, but it went ahead and incremented the second person entering anything into that form. So I now have recorded the data into the database. And one thing I want to point out is message type. So message type, the value for that is question. And that is because I selected the radio button question. Now, when I go back to the contact form, the HTML, look at the input radio. There's an input radio that has a value of comment and has the name message type. And then we have another input that's a radio button. It has the value question and it has a name message type. Now, the value that we put in here, right, is what's going to be recorded in the database, right? So if I selected the radio button question, it's the value that I have tied to that is the word question. And that's what we have being shown right here, question. That means if I want, I can put any sort of value and that's going to be tied to question. And then whatever value that I assign it is going to be recorded, right? Okay, so I have that. Now, the second part that I want to bring to your attention is the other type of method. So I'm now back to the HTML related to the form, the contact form, and I'm going to change this to say post, right? Now, when I change this to post, that means the user can still enter information in the form and it's gonna get sent to the database, but the information is not gonna be shown in that URL bar. So for example, here's the information that I entered initially, it got recorded and stored to the database, but people can see this information. Now, when I write post instead of get, I'm gonna go ahead and save changes. I can modify my HTML within the host. I made the change here. Now I have to go back to my PHP file and I'm going to do an edit right there. And instead of it saying _get right here for all these variables, I'm now going to change this to say post. Right. Then I'm just going to go ahead and save. Right. All right. Now, when I hit save, I'll close out of that. And I can also close out of the contact form. And I'm going to go back to the main page. I'll hit refresh. Then I'll go to the contact form and I'm going to type in some information there. And then I'm going to select comment this time. And then now I am going to hit submit. Now when I hit submit, it says record saved. If you look at this information right here at the URL bar, we do not have that information being stored or visible to the user, right? So post is something that should be practiced when it comes down to transferring information from the website to the database. There are other approaches out there, but these are the two common ones when it's tied to the form in the contact HTML page, right? Okay, now that is a quick overview. There's a lot that can be done here, but you now kind of have an idea of how this all works, where you have external files, external CSS, you have HTML files. All of these things could be dumped inside the file manager. If you're subscribed to a host, you'll just put it in a public.html folder. You can see right here, I have the files. I have maybe a couple of files that are irrelevant, but I also have a folder that has my images, and that is set up the same way that I've set it up in Visual Studio Code. Index.html is considered to be the home page by default. And when somebody goes to the domain datagates.com, it will automatically take them to the index.html file. Okay. All right, so hopefully you now have a better idea of how to publish a website. If you have any questions, and if this is something that you're interested in doing, please let me know. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to help you out. All right, thanks for watching.